Next we want to assemble the PCB, but before we can do that we'll need to do a little bit of hacking on the display. So there are two things to be done on it. First we'll need to do a little bit of filing on the corners to get them round and to make the display fit into the housing. And we'll also need to remove this SD card holder, and that's because the way it will look at the end is that the development board will be sandwiched between the DAVEGA PCB and the display PCB like this, and then the SD card holder would be in the way of the development board, so we need to remove it. So actually let me do that first. It's not that hard. You just take basically any pliers and just pull it off. And once you get the metal out, you should be able to lift this piece of plastic like this, and now if you just wiggle it a little bit it should come off. And now you just take the cutting pliers and cut the remaining pins. Well, actually they are quite brittle, so you can even remove them by hand. Let me just clean this. And for filing, you don't need to file it too much. Just a little bit will be enough. Just to get the corners a little bit round. So here's how the display should look with the SD card holder removed and with the rounded corners. And now that we are done with it, we can start assembling the PCB. The first step is to solder the development board on the DAVEGA PCB, and this is a little bit tricky to do because it has to be such that there's no space between the two PCBs, otherwise it wouldn't fit between the DAVEGA PCB and the display. And also it's important to use the correct orientation of the development port, so here's where the USB port should be. You don't want to put it this way. Okay, so the way we'll do this is by using the header pins. We'll need 2 rows of 10 pins. So let me get those. And we'll only be using the inner holes on the development board. We will ignore the ones near the edge. And now the header pins will go in from the bottom of the DAVEGA PCB. Then we put the development board on like this. And now we'll have some of the header pins poking out of the development board, and actually this is a bit too much, so we'll need to lift the DAVEGA PCB a little bit so that we have less of the pins poking out. And the way I do this is by using some old PCBs. I put 4 of them on each side. Okay, and now I can go ahead and solder the pins on. Okay, so this looks good. And now we'll need to do the other side. But first we need to get rid of this plastic. So we'll want to cut just underneath the plastic, but actually this way it's very hard to get underneath it, to cut it. So we'll need to lift it up a little bit. And it's much easier done when you heat it up first. So I'll use my heat gun. And now I use my round nose pliers, get underneath the plastic from one side first and from the other side, and then I go from the middle like this. You can even completely remove it, but then once you start cutting the pins, you end up with them flying all over the room, so it's actually better to keep the plastic on. So now I can start cutting, and I want somewhere between 1 and 2 millimeters poking out of the PCB. Okay, so something like this should be okay. And now I'll do the other side the same way. Okay, and now we can just go ahead and solder the pins on the PCB. Okay, so now we have no gap at all between the two boards, so that's good. Next we'll want to put the capacitor on. So for the capacitor, the orientation is important. It has a little arrow with a minus sign, and the arrow has to be pointing to the negative rail, so that's here, here's the positive. So the capacitor goes in like this. Okay, and now we put on the connectors. So we'll need one 4-pin connector and 3 2-pin connectors. And I like to do it by putting them all in first. Then I carefully flip the PCB over so that they don't fall off. Like this. And now I only solder one pin for each connector. That way, if I'm not happy with the position of it, I can easily move it. Okay, well, now this looks actually pretty good. Maybe this one may need moving very little. So you can just do it by holding the connector with your left hand, and with your right hand you heat up that single pin, and once the solder melts you can move the connector to the desired position. So now it's slightly better, and I'll go ahead and solder the remaining pins. Okay, and last we'll want to put on the display. So the display goes in like this. And before you solder it, it's better if you install the spacers so that you have the correct distance between the two boards. So the distance should be exactly the size of the spacers. So let me put them where they should be, and I'll put the bolts in as well. And I'll actually put on 2 nuts as well. Okay, so now you'll see that we have a little bit of the pins coming out of the PCB. It's not really ideal. Ideally you'd have like an extra millimeter, but it will work. I've done like 25 of these and I didn't have any problems with a bad contact here. So let's just solder them on. Okay, so that's it. And now we can actually go ahead and test if everything is working. So let me remove these bolts again. And we'll plug in the micro USB and we'll see if anything comes up on the display. It should. So let me plug in the micro USB and you can see that it's working. It doesn't have a connection to the desk, so it's not showing any numbers, but it's working. So that's good news.